Daniel Finke got his PhD in philosophy from Fordham University and then spent 11 years teaching in university classrooms. Now, though, he operates as a freelance philosophical practitioner. He teaches philosophy online, he writes a blog, and he offers philosophical advice. So, Dan Finke, welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thanks, it's great to be here.
Well, before we get on to the philosophical advice, which I do think is intriguing, could you tell us a little bit more about why you made this transition from the ivory towers of academe to this online agora where you act as a kind of cyber Socrates?
I got into philosophy for very personal reasons, as part of my own, religious thinking, and what wound up happening was I just wound up always drawn in philosophy to the practical dimensions of it. Even the most theoretical aspects of philosophy fascinate me because I have a personal grasp of why this would be relevant. And so I'm interested in the whole of philosophy and even in the more technical and arcane aspects of it. But it's because I always have a sense for how it's a practical sort of topic. And Nietzsche was my dissertation topic. And he's one of the great practical philosophers in the sense of one of the people who's writing about how to live well and how to do philosophy in a way that's relevant to our lives. And so that was sort of my impulse. And I had been writing my dissertation for quite a long time, and I felt very remote from the public discussion in that process. And I got frustrated with that and started a blog and sort of got sucked into that by the blog's success. And eventually I had accumulated enough interest in my work from the blog that there were people who were coming to me and saying that they were inspired to study philosophy based on things I was writing. And then I realized these could be people who could be my own students if I just offered the classes. And the next thing you know, I was in business for myself. And with the way I liked to do philosophy, I was wanting to put my ideas straight out there to be relevant to a public discussion, to not get bogged down in the more arcane kinds of disputes that get you published, to get you on an academic track. So I had already been diverting my energies into doing this sort of public work instead of putting together the kind of resume that would get me a tenure track job. So once I realized that I could build a business of teaching independently and doing these philosophical advice sessions with people independently, it just seemed a no-brainer that that's where I'd rather be, doing this kind of public engagement philosophy rather than trying to write in a technical way that would be interesting only to a small number of people. So I wound up just going into business for myself. That was 6 years ago, and and my classes haven't debated since. And I've got a loyal cadre of students who are there just year round, and it's been terrific.
Because I think a lot of people do have that idea that philosophy is something arcane and esoteric and can't imagine how it could possibly be used as a way to help people in the way that philosophical advice is targeted in helping people. Could you explain to me a little bit about what philosophical advice is and how that works?
Yeah, so what philosophical advice is about is, first of all, just to be clear, it's not a licensed therapy. It's not treatment of mental illness. The idea is that a lot of our problems don't stem from our being mentally sick in any particular way.
You're giving us a nice tour of your home at the moment as well. So thank you for that. You really are the roving philosopher.
Well, I'm trying to make sure that we can't hear the crying baby in the next. So that's
real life problems, real life issues. I'm sorry
Yeah,
I interrupted you
my
there.
son is only 3 weeks old, so he won't cooperate all the time.
I'm
So,
your time today.
oh no problem. So yeah, so a lot of people's problems are not mental health problems. A lot of people's problems don't have to do with what's wrong with them psychologically, or they're not just problems of how to manipulate their own brain from a third person perspective of psychology. They're problems of the truth of their beliefs or the rightness or wrongness of their values. They're problems with how they're conceptualizing the world. And so much of what people are trying to reason through in their problems, this could be problems about ethical choices, problems in relationships, value priorities in how they organize their lives, struggles to deal with their emotions, struggles to make a coherent narrative sense of their lives. All these major decisions in their lives, all of these issues people struggle with, not just because they have a mental health issue, right? They don't just they struggle with them because they involve critical thinking and analysis of problems. And a lot of these things will come down to how people conceptualize important things like love or friendship or morality or politics, or how they put their conceptual scheme together, what their assumptions are. Do their beliefs have logical contradictions to them? All of this is relevant, right, to making good decisions, to figuring out how to rank your values, figuring out how to make a difficult ethical decision. So this is something that people could use, the sort of skills that philosophers have in analyzing concepts, looking for logical consistency, thinking through theory, thinking through what makes for a coherent approach to life, a coherent set of beliefs, et cetera, et cetera. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it brings two things to mind for me immediately. One of them is a salutary move away from the medicalization of a lot of our problems. And the other thing is, it's as if you're offering the role of a wise elder in a community.
It would be presumptuous to do that, obviously. Rather than imagining myself as a wise elder, which I'm certainly
not that you're that old. I mean, you're young,
right.
A young man still, but I mean that kind of role.
Yeah, it's definitely the role of an incisive conversation partner, right? Mm-hmm. And like actual therapists, there's the outside perspective, right? Someone who's not in your shoes, not in your circle of friends. There's that element that's still there. And there's the ability to sort of help someone dialectically reason through, through conversation, through the back and forth, that approach to help, getting that other voice to help you think through the steps of what you're thinking yourself. The goal isn't, of course, just as with therapists, the goal is not to tell people what to do. It's not to dispense a wisdom that people don't have. Most of it is the process of helping someone work through their own, what they already know inside, right? It's a very Socratic sort of thing. One of the things you find, and I'm sure therapists find this too, is a lot of times people will come to you and they really know the answer to what they need to do. And what they're going to do with you is, sometimes they're looking for permission to accept what they already know. And sometimes what they're doing is they're looking for they're looking for someone to bat it around with and get a confirmation that they have the right answer. And so a lot of times, the word advice is tricky. I say I do philosophical advice. The reason I use that word is just to avoid the word counseling, because in some contexts, that's going to be a protected license word. So you have to be very careful because of licensing issues. And I never want to give a false impression that I'm offering some sort of psychological licensed practice.
Yeah.
The reason I use advice is not because I'm telling people what to do from some place of superior wisdom, but it's because it's the process of advising someone, and advising someone is listening to them and helping think through what they are looking for, what they believe, and help them understand their own perspective. And that's primarily the kind of advising I'm doing. And then sometimes I have a strong opinion, and unlike a therapist, I'm free to give that. So sometimes I do give advice, but I don't mean to imply that I'm any kind of a guru with any kind of special wisdom. I do want to make that clear.
And so what kind of problems have people come to you with, if there is anything that you feel that you're able to sort of sprinkle with to give us a real live sense of how these sessions go? That would be great.
It could be anything. Sometimes somebody is trying to figure out what to do about cheating partner, or it could be somebody could be talking to me about dealing with their differences in religious beliefs from their parents, or how to make a difficult decision about, an overbearing boss, or basically the same sorts of conflict resolution issues, the same sorts of issues with reconciling their beliefs. A lot of people come to me in particular to work out philosophical categories after a loss of faith, because I write a lot about that sort of stuff on my blog. And so a lot of people who are non-believers need help sort of, like instead of going to a priest or a pastor of some sort who's going to tell them they have to believe in things they don't believe in, there's this room for people who want to have conversations about religion or free will. A lot of people come to me to talk about that, or they want to think through a metaphysics or an ethics in a systematic way. And for a lot of people, you only have church for those topics. For ordinary people, there's church, and for or you go to school and you could study philosophy. But like, who can you go to if you don't believe in priests and pastors? Who do you go to talk about these issues of synthesizing your views on metaphysics and your views on ethics and what, where is meaning to be found, and how can all this be made to have rational sense, and do we have free will, and do our actions matter? These sorts of questions are deeply important, but for the layperson, what institution or what person do you go to if you're not going to a religion and to a religious institution? And so there is this enormous wealth of wisdom from philosophy, from the philosophical tradition over centuries, millennia even. And so I see just this wide open room for philosophers to help people reason through these things. And again, not by imparting some knowledge, some settled viewpoint that I have, but by debating it out with you and helping you see the connections and answering philosophical, explaining what the options are and helping work through your take on things. So a lot of people come to me to help work out their philosophical worldview.
And people can kind of then take ownership of those views, which would generate even more meaning than adopting the view of someone else, I would imagine. Yeah,
that's exactly it. And that's one of the things that's so wonderful, even when you talk about the arcane technical philosophers. Philosophy philosophy teachers, as a practice of philosophy, there's such an ethos of emphasizing the dialectical process, by which we mean reasoning is a process of conversation, right? It's a process of a back and forth working with your particular mind, right? Like, so for example, some people wonder, why do I need to take your philosophy classes? Because I can just go read the books, right? Well, the reason you need a philosophy teacher is not because I have all the right answers. I tend to think I do, but it's not because I'm just going to say, oh, here's the right answer. Do you have free will? Yes. There you go. There's your answer. It's not going to be something like that, right? It's going to be instead that when you read other people's books, you're just going to, if you have a bunch of prejudices that you haven't analyzed, or you have a firm viewpoint on the world, you're going to be very easily inclined, if you're an ordinary person, and even if you're a philosopher, you're going to be very easily inclined to think you see why this or that position is just foolish, right? It takes talking to somebody who is really skilled at philosophy to be able to show you your own prejudices, to show you why arguments that you think are just easily dismissed are maybe more complex, maybe have more going for them than you thought, right? What you need is someone to respond to the way you're responding to philosophy, to kind of unearth your prejudices, unearth your assumptions, open up clarifications that you're blind to as someone who's locked in your own viewpoint. And that's what we do. That's why, for example, when I teach my philosophy classes, they're not just like, here's a bunch of material for you to go memorize, and it's just a static material. These are the things Descartes said. These are the things Socrates said. It's not like that. What it is we'll explain an idea, and then it's, what do you think of that idea? And then here's your opinion then gets analyzed and challenged, so that it's constantly forcing you to go to another level. And that those texts can't necessarily do that themselves for most people. We need people who have been around the block and know how the arguments work and can help us get out of our own blinders. And it helps to have that kind of personal guide to do that. That's what I kind of do in my classes.
I'm thinking that reminds me of one of the key aspects of psychological health being psychological flexibility, and it sounds as if there's a sort of a thinking, a cognitive, a philosophical flexibility that's coming through there. One of the aspects of philosophy that's become very popular these days, as far as leading a good life is concerned, is Stoicism. Could you tell us a little bit about what Stoicism actually is, and whether you feel that it does offer lay people a good guide to a good life?
Stoicism is a philosophy tradition that goes back to the Roman times as a formal school, and it's a tradition that's focused on. It's really best summed up by what I think it's Niebuhr in the 20th century, who formulated the Serenity Prayer, which was God, give me the courage to change the things I can, and the serenity to accept the things I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I think that actually encapsulates what Stoicism is about. It's about seeking the wisdom to know the difference between what you can change and what you can't, and to come to reconcile yourself to what can't be changed, and to not indulge emotions that will ultimately be futile because you can't change the circumstance. It's about living as rationally in harmony with reality as you can. So it's a matter of training your emotions to accept realities that are inflexible, to not spend on a futile emotional energy on those things. That's really what I take to be the core insight of Stoicism. And so it's really about a habit of meditating on what's the rational response in every situation, and to prioritize virtue, of course, to prioritize reason, to understand the bad things that happen within the context that's most constructive, right? So sometimes you read the Stoics and they can tend a little bit towards rationalization, right? That's one of the, it's like a coping mechanism for harsh truths is to find the positive in them, or to, whatever method of resigning you can. Now, to me, to me, the Stoics are insightful in some ways and not helpful to me in other ways. So I'm not by any means a devout Stoic or a dogmatic Stoic or a doctrinaire Stoic. But what the Stoic approach to things taught me, when I was reading the Stoics and internalizing them, what's been most valuable to me has been sort of the analysis of every emotional response. And to think about every emotional response and to think through what's the most rational way to feel here and what's the most rational thing to do here. I like one simple thing, for example, very simple thing is, missing my bus and then asking myself, was there some reason that this was my fault? And if it wasn't, like letting go of the emotion, that negativity about kicking myself. And if it was my fault, instead of beating myself up, thinking in terms constructively of how do I prepare to not do that next time, right? In other words, instead of getting overwhelmed by an emotion, analyze, is there anything I could have done? And if you realize there's nothing you could have done, letting go of that anxiety as though somehow your fault. And if it was something your fault, then thinking through next time, how do I avoid this emotion in the future? Now, there's just that constructive approach to your emotions. Another thing is just letting go of things you can't have. Just not spending emotional energy on things you can't have. Once you realize you can't have it, it's over and we move forward and you only focus on what's available. And this sort of thinking for me, and I know we've talked about this before, but I wrote an article in 2013 where I'd taken an approach to things where I said, and I saw it as inspired by the Stoics, where I took what I called a no expectations.
I read this article and I found it. I thought it was very powerful, and I wrote down actually one of the a little passage towards the end, just that section. Feel your helplessness without confusing it with hopelessness. You don't have to be all powerful to be powerful. I was just struck. I mean, you write beautifully, and it's well worth people diving into your blog to get a sense of the way that you write and the issues that you address. But if you'd just like to go into that aspect of expectations a little bit more deeply, that would be great.
Yeah, because it's this cliche, and this is the thing about wisdom. Most of it sounds cliche because it's well known, right? Wisdom is not something you need to go seek out a philosopher to find. You can find it everywhere. But the problem with it is internalizing it, right? Most of the wise sayings are cliches, but when they strike you, when you internalize them, when they hit you at the right moment, the right time, they become life-changing truths that you really appreciate the profundity of. And for me, the whole idea of having no expectations just really struck me from a Stoic perspective in 2013. What I realized was, or I hypothesized, that what we do in life is we wind up taking what we expect to happen as, or like when we expect something good to happen, we wind up attaching ourselves as though it's something we already have. And there's this disproportionate tendency we have to get upset about things we've lost than about things we've never had. And so there's plenty of good things we don't have, and we're not upset about it, right? You're not upset about, you could write just a long list of things that could be in your life that aren't, that you're not daily upset about. But if you lose a particular thing you already have, then we tend to get really obsessed with it. And what I realized was when we start to, when it comes to taking chances in life, when it comes to trying things in life, what I think we wind up doing is, as soon as we say, I'm going to apply for this job, or I'm going to try and become friends with that person, or I'm going to try and land this client, right? Or I'm going to save up money for this vacation. What we wind up doing is we wind up putting our emotional investment in this one possible good thing as though it's one of the things we already have and don't want stripped from us. And because of that, we take less chances because we emotionally invest in each of the chances. And each one now, it's some sort of referendum on our desirability, whether this friend, comes through, or this client comes through, or this opportunity comes through. Whereas if we recognized that what we're aiming for is not ours already, it's nothing already belonging to us, that if we don't get it, it'll be taken away. It's just one of a huge number of possibilities. If we actually recognized the vast number of things we could do, if we just were imaginative every day, and we recognize that any particular thing we try is just one attempt, and there's many other attempts we can make, then it opens up our eyes, right? So, for example, when I started my, and it was this philosophy, for example, that got me to start my business, because I thought to myself, all I have to do is tell my Facebook friends I'm teaching classes. And what happens if they don't come? I've lost nothing, right? If I saw myself invested in either they come or I'm a failure, then if nobody came, then I would have just given up. But when I just said, if nobody comes, it's okay. I didn't have online students yesterday, so I won't have them tomorrow. Then when they came, then I said to myself, okay, if I now say I'm expecting all the people who come on the first day to stick with it, then I'll just be devastated as they leave, right? So instead, in the beginning, I've gotten better now, but in the beginning, I didn't even keep records of who was coming, because I didn't want to get fixated on them as though, oh, this person belongs to me. They're now my student. They're my client. It was just, if they come back, they come back. If they don't, they don't. That attitude made it so that all the rejection that comes from, half of the people not coming back, only half the people come, I just didn't feel the rejection, because I didn't psychologically lock in that this person has to come back or it means something important, right? You just take what comes, and so I spent a whole year just taking opportunities as they came and looking for more opportunities. And then every time I took an opportunity, forget about it. Don't think, oh, that one has to pay off. Just go on to the next one. And opportunity after opportunity started opening up. And within a year, I had a full-time business and went off on my own and just started taking more and more chances. And the next thing you know, I wound up in France and getting married, and another year later, just things started to fall into place by just taking more of the opportunities. And the way I did that was by putting less expectation on each one. So that was the awakening for me.
It sounds as if you feel that the way that this kind of critical reasoning and logical thought through issues has actually helped you a great deal in your life. Do you think it's helped you in areas where traditionally people might regard them as emotional problems, I appreciate that is an emotional problem in terms of investing in expectations, yeah. but the more traditionally related emotional problems, have you experienced the benefits yourself?
Oh yeah, that's exactly it. It's because our emotions are, and this is where I'm less Stoic and more Aristotelian, and that Aristotle is more of an affirmer of the emotions and their value. The Stoics tend in a direction of mistrust of the emotions. And I think we need a healthier understanding than that, and a more balanced picture. The emotions are immediate intuitional responses to the world, and they're they're driven by intuitions that are rational deeper down. I think the emotions are either a particular, different emotions are different, but some emotions are that we have an ingrained response to certain kinds of things that are appropriate to cause us sadness, or appropriate to cause us anger, or appropriate to cause us. Yes,
this is reminding me of David Hume in saying the reason will always be slave to the emotions.
Yeah, I differ strongly with him about that. I don't think that reason is a slave to the passions. I am far more of a rationalist than him on that. What I'm actually saying is that the passions are a kind of reason. They're one of two kinds. Either what they represent is all right, so there are some things that are of the kind of value that it's appropriate that we dislike them. And there's some things that it's appropriate that we like. And we have certain immediate responses of liking and disliking that are rationally evolved, right? Like we have evolved to have immediate emotional connections to certain things because they're usually very good for us or usually very bad for us. And there's we don't even need reason to be explicit. We've been set up to have an immediate response to certain good things, an immediate negative response as a shortcut from, that's been evolved into us.
So kind of like mother's touch compared to pain, for example.
Yeah, exactly. Like you have an immediate emotional negative response to pain because it so regularly correlates with something bad for you, right? It's a warning system. And so you've been set up to not go through the cumbersome work of abstractly thinking about that, right?
Yeah.
Pain is a warning signal that you don't have to then abstractly figure out. It gives you the immediate information. And so emotions are a rough and ready, quick detection system of value and of appropriate responses to value. It's just that it's a crude system, right? And it needs to be refined through thinking and through lots of conceptual understanding of the world. And we have more refined emotional reactions often. And some of our emotional reactions then are based on lots and lots of thought. Like if you have I have very strong feelings in favor of the freedom of speech. And so if I get very angry and outraged at somebody denying someone their freedom of speech, that's not just some evolved tendency. That's a reflection of a lot of thought I have, a lot of abstract values that have been argued to me. It's based on a lot of experience. And so, but even though I have all this abstract thinking, yes, I will emotionally respond as the quick mechanism, right? And to me, the key is that so even our quick responses, I think, do reflect either a rational setup that's quite natural between us and ordinary environmental experiences, or even learned rational relationships that we have these effective ways of manifesting our realization of them. And so to me, the question with the emotions is just, are they rationally aligned with reality? The emotions are not the enemy. It's just that, are they proper? Are they fit to the situation? Are they reasonable? And so the key with the emotions is to ask, okay, why did I have this emotion? What rational reasons might be there? And then in what ways might it be a mistaken emotion, right? Like in what ways is it unreasonable? And so to me, the question with the emotions is to train them so that they respond to reason as much as possible, rather than to minimize emotion as some sort of external thing that's at odds with our reason. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that kind of gets it back to in virtue ethics, doesn't the application of an appropriate response to a situation, it gradually becomes ingrained, and then doesn't Aristotle say that it becomes, virtue ceases to become something that feels like a duty, it becomes a pleasure because that becomes the habitual response.
Exactly. And it's this habituation to where you embody the virtue. You don't just do an honest thing, you are an honest person. And you are so habituated that being honest in the right time, in the right way, the right reasons gives you pleasure.
So do you feel that an understanding of such wise character advice, having role models, having the opportunity to be involved in those kind of dialectics, can, in a sense, enhance people's characters, develop their personalities, and bring forth a generation of people who are more attuned to virtue sounds such an old-fashioned word, but for want of a better one, I'll use it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's exactly what it is that if you have people who are reflective, and everybody's doing this to some extent, right? Unfortunately, philosophy is something people, even who are unlicensed get to do. Like everybody does philosophy. Everybody's working through, are my emotions reasonable? Hopefully they're thinking about this, right? Are my responses proportionate and rational? Are they reasonable for the circumstance? Like we all do it to some particular extent. And, philosophical reasoning is just bringing in, even more fine-tuned analysis of the concepts and of our behavior. So it's doing what we already are well equipped, as ordinary thinkers. Lots of ordinary, people who are having particular specialization in philosophy can be wonderful moral thinkers. What philosophy gives is some theoretical help to kind of untangle certain confusions that even good people might still have, intellectually. And so that's where we can help, right?
Well, I was going to ask you, are there any other philosophers particularly that you have found helpful when you've been investigating your own idea of the way to lead a good life, and the way to think more clearly about the things that matter to people in life?
Obviously, yeah, I wrote my dissertation on Nietzsche, and there's a myriad of directions that pulled me. Obviously the Stoics, Aristotle, contemporary philosophers. I really enjoy the perfectionist tradition, people like Thomas Herke. But then there's also, and again, you and I were just talking about this before meeting.
Yes.
There's a wonderful new book by Ido Landau about meaning in an
Finding
imperfect
meaning
world.
in an imperfect world, or
Meaning in an imperfect world. Yeah, and it's a wonderful book that summed up a lot of what I was already saying myself, and then gave tremendous extra insight. I mean, there's too many people to mention.
I think that's a wonderful book if you're feeling feeling low, or feeling that sort of existential angst or midlife crisis. Any of that, it really it sort of like strongly helped me to feel that a life that's I don't have children, for example, and children, I think, as a woman, I kind of feel that children give huge value to your life. And that book really helped me to feel that there are so many other aspects to life that I kind of disregard and overlook and don't really value. I mean, I value them in the moment, but then I kind of think, yeah, sunset, and actually it does matter. And it did help me to change the way that I was thinking about those things.
Yeah, and it's funny because when you try and think like what really motivates you in life, and one of the things that really motivates everything I do is a sort of anti-nihilism, an aversion, intellectually and emotionally, to nihilism, this view that nothing matters, or the denigration of the things that matter, the sort of minimization of how much things matter.
Yes.
And so, yeah, so there's, I spend a lot of time with people who think life is meaningless and come to me as a foil. And I have to laboriously, work it through with nihilists. But it's a fun back and forth, because I'm constantly sitting down with nihilists, and they throw everything they got at me. And if I can persuade them, I don't know. We'll see. But again, that's the process, right? That's so yeah. That book was so great for sort of deflating many of the temptations to nihilism, many of the illusions that people or the confusions that people get into conceptually that lead to nihilism. So yeah, I've done a couple close readings of that book with students who were struggling to figure out how value worked, if anything could be of value. And particularly, a lot of people who come to me are perfectionists in the bad sense. There's two senses of perfectionism, right? There's perfectionism as the philosophical tradition, which says that at least one of the most important things of value is the attainment of excellence, right? So, for example, Aristotle could be read as a perfectionist in that his philosophy, his ethics is about realizing our excellence, to live an excellent human life, realizing the various human excellences, including the excellence of virtue, but also beyond just moral virtue, virtues of skill, and so this idea of as a contrast with, for example, hedonism, right, which says that the only thing of value is pleasure, and the only reason music is valuable is because it gives us pleasure. The only reason that that technology is valuable is because it gives us pleasure, or knowledge is only valuable if it brings us pleasure. That sort of common reductive view that says the only thing of value is pleasure, the perfectionist argues that no, the excellence of performing a musical instrument well is good in itself, right? Or the excellence of scientific discovery or knowing things. These are excellent in themselves. And so a perfectionist might be a perfectionist in addition to believing other things have intrinsic value, or a perfectionist might say it's the one intrinsic value is our realization of our excellences. That the idea that excellence is important and sometimes a more important value than pleasure, or a more fundamental value than pleasure, or other competing, competitors for fundamental value. That's a tradition of perfectionism which I belong to.
Okay, I understand. I hadn't understood that distinction.
Right, and Landau acknowledges there's a difference to what he's talking about. He acknowledges that's fine. He's not against that tradition. But on the other hand, there's the kind of perfectionist that Landau's criticizing and that I would criticize. And that's the sort of person who has a distorted view of value that says, unless what I do is perfect, it's worthless, right? Yeah. So I'm not as good a composer as Beethoven, so, it's all crap, right? And that attitude of perfectionism, where you're just beating yourself up because the perfect has become the enemy of the good, that's the kind of perfectionism that a lot of nihilism engages in, right? A lot of nihilistic ideas are people saying, well, this isn't perfect, so therefore it's worthless, right? And Landau does a wonderful job of saying, look, that kind of thinking is just false. It's too simplistic. It's too all or nothing.
So philosophy can help us see a way to finding meaning when we've lost it, and that must be a key thing in a society where, I was listening to the radio today, and they've claimed that in the UK the incidence of lost work days from depression is likely to become the biggest cause of lost work days overall in the country, but in the next year. And it does seem to me that the emphasis placed on expectations, on an unrealistic view of happiness, and on it to a certain, certainly for people like me, that kind of perfectionist train of thinking, aside from any severe mental health issues, there is just a trend for people to find life tough. Yeah.
And now, when you get into the issue of depression, and again, this is where it gets difficult, because
saying low mood,
right.
People can have low mood without it necessarily being a sort of clinical situation, but it can still lead. It could still lead to people having lower energy, lower lethargy, and struggling with life, and it's still a problem for them, whether it's clinical or no.
Right, and even where it's depression, again, I can't treat mental illness. I'm not going to prescribe a drug, and I don't look at people from the perspective of the third person perspective, right? The scientific perspective of what are the inputs and outputs of the brain, that cause it to function in certain ways. But nonetheless, even when people are depressed, what I can give, if this person's also seeing a mental health person,
right.
What philosophers can give is, even depressed people are not simply victims of their brain, right? They're also reasoning, and their ideas are not all just generated by the depression. Some of them also come from reality. Some people are depressed in part because of beliefs, and they have good reason for, or values judgments that they have good reason for, and or even if they're not the correct beliefs and not the correct value judgments, there's at least reasoning involved that got them there, and that matters, right? It matters. The content of what we think, and the danger is to think that well, and to people who are looking at the world as half empty, right? They worry that any sort of positive message, oh, life has meaning, oh, you have value, this tends to be just platitudes, right?
Mm-hmm.
They tend to dismiss this as just things you say to try and delude yourself, and so there's a sort of imperviousness, that can be entrenched, and the problem is that a lot of positive sayings could be pablum. They could be people just trying to talk themselves up. So to me, it's just really valuable that people who don't just have a mental health problem, or even if they have a mental health problem, that in either case, their ideas are taken seriously. They don't think things have value. They don't think their lives are what they should be, etc. And those are real issues that could be rationally discussed without being just dismissed as, oh, that's your, that's the mental health, that's your mental health problem. Well, it could be in part, but it's also your reason, and your reason should be respected, and you really should be engaged rationally. And that's why one of the things I do try and avoid is some of the Stoic writings, for example, will sound like they're just trying to interpret whatever way will make things sound good, right? Mm-hmm. And that kind of BSing is what I try to, avoid. Like, I'm willing to face, here's some hard truths, To me, the only consolation is not a happy thought. It's a happy thought that we really believe is true, and we have good reason to think is true. And so my idea of combating nihilism is not by, not by wishing it away or just trying to emote it away. The goal is to really critically analyze the claims it makes and treat them seriously, and to treat the person who is struggling with these ideas. It's not just a brain disease, even though sometimes that might help cause those ideas sometimes, and in some aspects, and that again that needs to be treated by a mental health professional. The aspect of it that's rational is what I want to get into and really treat the arguments seriously, not wave them away as, oh, that's just not useful thinking, Well, people care about the truth. And that's why it's helpful to talk to a philosopher, because my goal is not just to make you feel better. It's to help you think through the truth.
That sounds like a wonderful place to end. I'm mindful of your time and your 3-week-old baby, who no doubt will be seeking your attention as well as your wife's at some point later this evening.
Yes, don't forget the 2-year-old.
And the 2-year-old. Dan, can you tell us where people can find you online? And we will have details and information in the show notes. And if there is anything else that you think we haven't covered this evening, please flag that up now.
Yeah, you can find me at danielfinke.com. That's Finke. Daniel Finke, Finke. People forget the C. So
I did when I was looking for you. Yep.
Yes. So it's a superfluous letter. I get it. I don't know why the Germans did that. Take it up with them. So danielfinke.com /what-is-philosophical-counseling. And the reason I send you to that specific page is that my main page got screwed up and I can't get my web guy to fix it yet. So, but you can go to the main page. It just might look a little disorderly, and click on the philosophical advice there, or, but mainly just write me at camelswithhammers@gmail.com, or reach out to me on Facebook at Dan Finke. Again, Finke. That's probably I respond best on Facebook. I respond there the most, as you figured out when we were setting this up. And if you friend me on Facebook, and message me, tell me why you're contacting me, and inquire about my classes. You can do a free session with me about anything. I offer an advice session or a class. I call it the Pick My Brain offer. So if you have one thing you want to talk to a philosopher about, just find me. And I'll spend an hour. You can pick my brain, and then if you want, the classes are live. They're interactive. They're not some kind of pre-canned thing. Just a few students, and they're chances for people to like what we talk about flows from what we're talking about, right? What my students and I are engaging about, and then we pick the topics based on what's interesting them, where our discussions have gone. And I give like no homework. We read text together in class, right? So you learn right there. So I design my classes for busy working people, who just love to learn on their own. And I minimize the stress. If I signed homework, nobody does it, and then they don't show up because they feel bad. It's not about what you have to do outside. You come in, we read a text together, we discuss it live. You don't have to be pre-prepared. And then if you don't come, I never charge people who don't attend. So it's not like the gym membership where you pay and then you just wasted your money if you don't show up. I just try and do everything I can to cater things to the working person who wants a 2-hour slot that they can fit to have a stimulating discussion every week about ideas. And then it doesn't have to become a chore. It doesn't have to become a money sink because they can't make the time for it.
But it does become a community as well, and that's also bound to have benefits.
Oh, it's wonderful. And again, like the loyalty I've had from students, I've had people for years and years, same students, and it's been really gratifying. The people who stick really stick. So,
well, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you so much, Issy. It's wonderful to see you again. Hope to see you back in class.